Tonight's presentation will offer a perspective on how the challenges of the current pandemic are influencing the environmental experiences of children and adolescents. Emphasis will be placed on a framework of interpersonal neurobiology and an understanding of what shapes identity and a sense of belonging. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Dan Siegel.
Thank you for inviting me to join you. It's an honor to be here with each and all of you. We're going to have time for discussion, and I'll offer some brief reflections on where we are in this moment of our life as a human family. What I'll do is try to weave together this framework called Interpersonal Neurobiology, which is basically how we bring all the different disciplines of understanding from the different fields of science with experiences that people have with contemplation, with religious teachings, with indigenous teachings, to try to look at some of the fundamental challenges we have today facing our planet. The pandemic of a virus has, of course, led us to have terrible suffering around the globe, with people, as we know, getting sick and dying and threatening our way of life, as well as just the terrible way in which the suffering is distributed to affect those who've been marginalized even more than those of us who are in positions of privilege. So it's really highlighted in this now almost 2-year period how interdependent we really all are. So there's a lot you can say about that pandemic of the virus, which we'll be focusing on today, but we know also that there are other pandemics that are affecting the world, social injustice being one, the way in which we have polarization being another, and another which we've heard a lot about this last week is the ways in which the environment is being treated in such a negative way by our human family. So these are all problems that we think about kids growing. And I know there was one child on the screen. I don't know if she's still here, but this would be perfectly appropriate for kids if they're listening. You know, the children and adolescents who are growing under our care are entering a world that has a great amount of suffering. People of all sorts have suffered in the world. For those of us who have a Jewish background, you know, we've done a journey of thousands of years of suffering. So we may just say, well, we are now in it in a fuller way as a human family. But these issues that our children are facing create in many ways what the environmental philosopher from Australia, Glenn Albrecht, calls earth emotions, feelings of what he calls solastalgia, the longing for a natural world that used to be very healthy, but is not anymore that way. And so that feeling of grief and sadness is something that kids begin to experience, even if we as adults try to not feel that. And certainly adolescents are very much aware of that. So as we approach a viral pandemic, we need to remember that there are these other pandemics, that is, things that are affecting all of humanity, that as teachers and as parents, it's, I think, our duty to really think about how this is impacting children and adolescents. So what I'd like to do is give you a very concise overview of how interpersonal neurobiology sees child and adolescent development, and focus especially on the role of relationships in shaping how the brain develops over these important years, and then weave that together with what the viral pandemic has been challenging us with by leading us to be in continual threat states and to be socially disconnected from one another as we're trying to keep physically distanced. And then what we'll do is then ask, what in practical terms can we do to try to deal with the reality of this. One thing we can do is try to keep our bodies healthy and keep moving. So you may notice that I'm moving because I do so much teaching. I actually teach on this walking desk. So I'm actually walking all day long as I talk to people all over the world. So I hope you'll excuse my walking, but it's what my body needs me to do. So we'll talk about the kind of some of the essential ingredients. So interpersonal neurobiology is a term meaning what would happen if we combine all these disciplined ways of knowing into one framework. And if you're interested in the science behind what I'm going to say tonight, then there's a book called The Developing Mind, which is a graduate school textbook. So it's not easy reading like a book for parents, but it is if you wanted to see all the science. So whenever my colleague Tina Payne Bryson and I write a book, it's essentially taking the developing mind findings and translating them into accessible language and exercises for parents based on the writings in that book. So that's one place you could go. The other place you could go is I'm the editor of a series where we have now 80 textbooks. So if you want to read more, there's a lot of reading you could do. And those are, professional books, but they're all the science is reviewed for everything I'm going to say. So this is just the background. So in a very condensed way, here's a way to think about child development. When a child is conceived and they're growing in the womb, there is a big push by genetic information, the information on our chromosomes based on DNA, that will determine in many ways how the body will develop in the womb and how the nervous system will begin to find its way to have different neurons, the basic cell of the nervous system, connect with one another. And then when the baby comes out of the womb, then experience also plays an important role for how the structure of the brain will form. So then you have both genetics, which helps determine things like temperament and basic structures of the nervous system, now is having an overlay of how experience is shaping that developing brain. So when the baby is first born, then there's all sorts of ways where the experiences we offer in what's called attachment will be shaping basic systems of the brain that help regulate how this brain comes to think of itself, how it regulates emotions, how she or he or they find their way to connecting with other people. And essentially what attachment is all about is 4 S's, where when we keep a child safe, when we see the inner life of a child with something I call mind sight, when you see the mind, the feelings, the thoughts beneath behaviors, you're seeing that child by seeing, and you're soothing a child when they're distressed. Those 3 S's, when they're present, they allow a child to feel felt by you. And when we have ruptures in any of those things, you can make a repair. And if there are repairs when ruptures happen in safety or in being seen or soothed, then over time, the child develops something called secure attachment. Now, the field I'm trained in to do research in is child forms of attachment. And you may have seen in the New York Times just yesterday, the cover part of the lifestyles part of the magazine was about, the newspaper was about attachment. And there's another version of attachment called adult attachment, which is studied in a very different way than how we study attachment in child forms of attachment. So what I'll be speaking to you about is the experience of research over the last 40 years that looks deeply at how parents interacting with children shape the way those kids develop. So what we have in the first dozen years of life essentially is a child whose brain is ready to soak in experience, which means how we communicate with a child, how we have them involved in events that go on. And the first dozen years of life or so is basically this brain accumulating more and more intricate connections in the neurons based on the experiences we as parents or as teachers provide. And so much of the brain's real estate, if you will, is social, is about making connections with other people. And in many ways, the social nature of human beings tells us that relationships are not just not icing on the cake, they are the main meal of our lives. And this led to a long line of reasoning over the last 30 years that I write about in a book called Mind, which is basically to say that the human mind is not just up in the head, as been taught to us since the time of Hippocrates for 2,500 years, but the mind can be found in the whole body, and it can be found in the relationships we have with other people and within nature. So that at a school, the mind is being shaped in the relational world that a child experiences. And so there you can see, even in the first dozen years of life, that a pandemic, which is inhibiting our ability to be with each other, is curtailing how the mind will be allowed to express itself. And so when kids feel frustrated that they can't be with friends, it isn't just frustration. It's a way in which, in fact, a fundamental need is being impaired. And finding creative ways of doing that, I know for us here and where I live, we're very close with the children next door. So what we did was we had outdoor movie night every weekend, so that even though we couldn't be inside, we'd come with our masks, set up a movie projector, and just have movies and share popcorn and all that kind of stuff. So we tried to make the relational world we have in those days, in the beginning of the pandemic, as you know, I hate to use the word normal, but as like it used to be as possible. And we still do outdoor movie nights. So even though we now share space because everyone's immunized. So when you look at it that way, you can say, well, a pandemic then, does it have to affect how a child feels safe? Let's look at those 4 S's. And the answer is that, yeah, the experience of the pandemic is giving us a feeling of threat repeatedly. And so safety is exactly what's constantly on our minds when we see something like the virus or when we're reading the newspapers. This isn't, of course, limited to a virus. It can happen just in Israel, for example. It can happen all the time with all the different violent things that go on. So life can go on even when you feel threatened. But for us as parents or educators, it's important to allow a child to express their fear, to talk about what they're experiencing, so that they can be seen, even if they're feeling unsafe in the world, and that you can soothe their distress. Because as we know, sadly, you know, life is full of uncertainty, and life is full of things that can harm us. So to help children just see that directly, they can see in how we respond that, in fact, this is just the way life is. So how do we deal with that? And the pandemic can be dealt with that. So kids have something called social referencing, where they refer socially to our emotional response. And just to give you an example of how the research goes, you take a little child who's crawling, it's called a visual cliff, along a plexiglass surface, and then underneath the plexiglass, even though it continues, there's basically like a cliff, like the edge of a table, only the plexiglass goes forward, so they can walk over this thing no problem, or crawl over it. But if they look to their parents and the parent looks distressed, the child will just stop and will reference their emotions and know this moment when they're looking at this cliff is a scary moment, and the child starts to feel scared because of the parent's response. If instead the parent is instructed to look fine and look happy because they know it's a plexiglass surface, no one's going to get hurt, the child comes to the edge, looks to the parent's face, sees them smiling, and just continues on across the plexiglass. So we have a whole network inside of us, especially as children, to check in with our caregivers and look at their face, hear their tone of voice, see their posture, sense their gestures, all these nonverbal signals, to basically ask the question, what is my caregiver feeling right now? And how should I feel based on how they feel? So the reason I wrote a book called Parenting from the Inside Out with my daughter's preschool director, Mary Hartzell, was we felt that parents should know how to tune into their own inner feelings so that they could actually find a way to, from the inside out, find a soothing, a way of being seen, and a way of feeling safe in themselves based on where they're at now in their lives and based on what happened to them in their own childhood experiences. So that would be a good resource to turn to, because we are basically profoundly influential with our nonverbal way that we are. So you can have someone who's saying all sorts of things like you're supposed to say, but if they look terrified, the child will be terrified. So what that means is, as we face the challenges the world is facing today, it really is up to us to figure out how to come to peace with uncertainty, how to come to peace with what's called a VUCA world. And VUCA is a military term that journalists now use that stands for a world that's volatile, which means it changes very quickly, that's uncertain, which means we don't know what's going to happen, that's complex, the C of VUCA, which means that a small input can lead to a large and very difficult to predict result. It's called nonlinear. That's what complex means. And then ambiguous means even if you read every newspaper, every textbook, even if you're up on every fact on the internet, even if that were true, the ambiguity of things means you don't know what it means, even if you knew everything, which you can't know. So VUCA is the times we're in, and things are changing very rapidly, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So, you know, one of the biggest instincts in any of us as an educator or as a parent is to have the opposite of VUCA. You don't want things to be volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. You want to know what's going on. To be able to predict means to keep safe. So these are challenging times for us. And I'm going to do an exercise in a moment to let you feel inside of yourself as an adult. And I see we still have a few kids on, so they can do this exercise too. It's a fine exercise. In fact, I do it with children in classrooms, and I do it in my private practice too. But it's not a fun exercise, but it's worth doing just so you can feel what we're talking about starting from the inside. But before we get to the exercise, let me just kind of finish the overview of development. So the kid is like a sponge, 0 to 12, soaking in what we're teaching them about how the world is. The brain is growing more and more connections among the neurons called synaptic connections. In some areas, new neurons are growing, and you're laying down connections among the existing neurons so they can communicate more effectively and in a coordinated way. What we've learned in a number of centers, including our center at UCLA, is that when adolescence begins, the brain no longer just simply makes new connections. It begins to actually prune itself down to make those connections more differentiated. So you're actually starting to lose neurons and their connections. And then as adolescence goes forward with this pruning, you then are going to lay down this substance called myelin in a very big way to allow those neurons that remain to be even more effectively communicating with each other. So that differentiation of the pruning and the linkage with the myelin formation is a balance we call integration. So the ultimate goal of this brain remodeling in adolescence is for adolescents to develop a more integrated brain, which is actually more efficient, effective, and capable of doing all sorts of things, even though sometimes people wrongly think adolescents are actually less capable. They're actually getting more and more sophisticated in what they can do. And adolescence, by the way, goes from around 11, 12, 13 years of age into the mid to late 20s. So this remodeling doesn't end when you have your 20th birthday. So teenage years and adolescence is not the same thing. Now, in adolescence, what this remodeling does is it creates this emotional spark for adolescents. So emotions are more intense. It has the social engagement networks are more activated. And in fact, there's a pushing away from birth parents to going toward friends more. There's a courage to actually have novelty seeking, where you're actually driven to try new things. And there's creative exploration, where the mind is considering not just what adults are telling me things are, but actually thinking about how things could be or should be. And so in many ways, when you look at the major advances in technology and science, and of course in art and music, you see it often comes from adolescent minds into the mid to late 20s. And this is the reason. This adolescent brain remodeling is setting us up as individuals to be really thinking outside the box. But as a species, it's probably adolescence that have allowed us to adapt to all aspects of Earth, because we push away from the familiar, and then we are open and ready to try out and have the courage to try out something new, which as adults, we're often tired. We just want to go home, watch a little television and go to sleep, but an adolescent has all sorts of changes we can talk about later, that make it so this is what's going on. So when you look at experience for adolescents during the pandemic, sadly, as you probably are hearing about, there's a huge increase in anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. So this is a very serious time in the field of mental health to be looking at overall the impact of the pandemic on youth. And one of the thoughts about that is that adolescents in particular are trying to find their identity, trying to find out where they belong. And the, what should be called physical distancing, but gets the name social distancing, is the exact opposite of what adolescents actually need to feel whole, to feel like they're developing in the right direction. So it's been a challenge for the high schools that I consult to think about how, you can keep kids who are on screens like this somehow finding connections. And there are creative ways to do that, but it is, quite a challenge for us to try to keep the developmental path going for adolescents. So part of, I think, what is the biggest challenge is that we are often during the pandemic in a reactive state. And what I'd like to do, now that we've covered a brief overview of brain development, is talk about, the kinds of states this brain gets into that can shut down the way we connect with one another and can shut down how we learn. So the way we're going to do this exercise is I'm going to say a word, I'll repeat it several times, and then I'll say another word, and then I'll have us pause again, and then we'll do a couple of things just so that we can see what the experience feels like. And my invitation to you is to simply be aware of whatever you feel, whatever arises. This is not necessarily going to be a pleasant experience, but I think it's a worthwhile experience for us to all have. So get yourself ready. And for the kids who are going to listen to this, just see what your body is telling you. And this is something that actually can be quite useful for kids to become aware of. Okay, so let's get started. Again, I'll say one word, I'll repeat it several times. We'll pause, I'll say another word, repeat that several times. Here we go. No. 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 Yes. 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 Now try putting one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly and put some gentle pressure. Let's take some nice deep breaths in and out. And now switch it out. So the hand that goes to your on your belly goes to your chest, the one on your chest goes to your abdomen. Put some gentle pressure, nice deep breaths. And now put it whichever way feels most comforting for you, right on top or left on top. Gentle pressure, nice deep breaths. And let's take a nice deep breath. And then if you're up for it, maybe we can do this in the chat. Turn your chat on and maybe you can just type in, what did it feel like when I said no? Just type in some words and let's just see what people say when you heard no. And I'll just repeat some of them. Intense, dangerous, scolding, upsetting, sorry, fear, shame, affronting, anxiety, unpleasant, shame, why, tight chest, shortness of breath, judged, fear, definitely, shock, braced, stressful. Okay, and I'm sorry about these. You can see how intense they are. I'm not even your dad telling you you're in trouble or something, but I'm just a guy on a screen saying no harshly. And let's just remember these words and remember this feeling. We're going to name it as a reactive state that we'll talk about in just a moment. Now let's take a deep breath and just let that go. And now try to remember what it felt like when then I switched to the word yes. And in a soothing way, or as much as I could, what does yes feel like? Soothing, soft, relief, validating, calming, easy, connected, embraced, an invitation, comfort, releasing, pleasant, calming. Okay, you can see all these very different things, even though I'm the same person and I'm just saying something nice, but for what? Yes, relaxed, and some people don't trust it. Now, let's do the hand story. If you felt comforted one way or the other, then let's do it. If the left on top was comforting, just write the word left. If the right was comforting, just write the word right. And let's just see if we can get a sense of the numbers. So there you go. Right, 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 right. Let's see. Yeah, it's mostly right, but some lefts. There you go. You can see it. And if both, yeah, so someone says the same. If they were the same, just write same in there. Let's see how many sames we have. This is often the way it is, where you've got about 2/3 are right on top and about 1/3 is left on top. But you have some where it's the same and some it doesn't help at all. If anyone's interested in getting a doctoral degree, no one's ever done the study, but it would be really pretty straightforward to do, and you can get a doctoral degree figuring that out. So this is just the idea that we can do something to comfort ourselves, sense the breath, hand on chest, hand on abdomen. So let's talk about this. Thank you for replying in the chat. The brain has two fundamental states. When we're threatened, we get that no brain state of reactivity. And the way we talk about it is with 4 Fs: fighting back, fleeing, freezing, or fainting. So fainting is when we're going to collapse out of helplessness. Freeze is when we tighten up and put a lot of energy into like temporarily paralyzing ourselves, very different from fainting. And fleeing, of course, is running away. And fighting is getting ready to, fight for your life. It's a threat state. All of those Fs are a part of the reactive state when we feel threatened. And over time, if that threat state remains, it can be exhausting. It can lead to burnout, it can lead to depletion, it can lead to depression. So the threat state in the immediate threat can be extremely useful, but if it's sustained, it can be really damaging to our lives, damaging even to our brain. So we're not meant to be in continual threat, but in many ways, the pandemic is constantly giving us threat, right? And when the whole system on the planet shut down, it was shutting down because we were in a threat mode. So right away from this no yes experience, you can see that anything we can do to bring ourselves from a reactive state of no, the fighting, the fleeing, the freezing, the fainting, anything we can do to take care of our inner experience and move ourselves to receptivity, even if the external factors stay the same, is really important to do for your own well-being. And at the same time, we need to realize that children pick that up too from us. So it's not only for our well-being, but it's for our family's well-being or our classroom's well-being. Right now, you may say, okay, well, what is that receptive state about? The receptive state, that yes brain state, is literally, we have several books on this in our series. You can look at the networks that turn on what's called a social engagement process that allow the whole system to become more what's called integrated, more calm, more clarity of mind. And that's the best way to teach. It's the best way to parent. It's actually the best way to live, is in a receptive state. So you may say, well, I can't go around saying yes all the time in the middle of a pandemic. What am I supposed to do? Well, research suggests that there is a practice that you can do every day to actually cultivate that receptive state of inner clarity, that some people would call it mindfulness, some people call it mindfulness and compassion. When I met with some researchers, they couldn't agree on exactly what to call mindfulness. So there was a new term that we came up with called 3-pillar practice. And what it means is the first pillar is you learn to focus attention, to strengthen your ability to focus. Second thing is you learn how to open awareness, to be able to be just not losing yourself in what is happening, but actually having a kind of awareness that's distinct from that which you're aware of. And the third thing is to develop kind intention. Those are the 3 pillars. Attention becomes focused, open awareness becomes open, and intention, your state of mind, becomes kind. Now, there's a practice you can do for free from our website, drdansiegel.com, where it's called the Wheel of Awareness. We have a book called Becoming Aware that teaches you how to do it, or the book Aware that kind of goes into a deeper dive on what the wheel is all about. But essentially, the wheel is a practice that has all 3 pillars in it. So if you say after this talk, oh my gosh, I remember the yes, no brain thing, but how do I get from no to yes? If you start doing the wheel practice, you'll actually cultivate, as a 3-pillar practice, you'll cultivate the following things. You will be developing integration in your own brain, which is the basis of resilience and well-being. And so you can hear a sentence like that and go, my God, that's an outrageously audacious statement. But that's why you can read these other books where the science is there to back up these sentences that sound like science fiction, but they're actually science fact. So you can actually use your mind to grow a more integrated brain in your head that's integrated then with your body and actually allows you to integrate with relationships. So that's the first thing. When I tell you the next 5 physiological changes that 3-pillar practice, when it's researched in different ways, in the Wheel of Awareness, you get it all in one practice. Usually they're studied in individual practices. But when you do 3-pillar practice, here are 5 research established changes to your body. And you tell me if during a pandemic or even any time, whether you would like this for you and your family members. And if you heard a vitamin gave you these changes, you might start taking it every day. Well, there is something you can do every day, and it's this 3-pillar practice. So here we go. Number one, remember we talked about that threat state, that stress that's there. Negative stress, the distress of a threat state can be lowered. You can lower the stress hormone cortisol with 3-pillar practice. That's number one. Number two, when you do these practices, you actually improve your immune system's ability to fight infection. And there's no better time than during a pandemic to have your immune system as strong as it can be. So your immune system actually will be more effective. Number three, you'll improve your heart's health by lowering high blood pressure, lowering cholesterol, but even having the heart in your chest communicate in a more balanced way with the brain in your head. So cardiovascular health is improved. Number four, many diseases we now know are caused by inflammation, systemic inflammation throughout the body. And these 3-pillar practices alter the molecules on top of genes called epigenetic regulators so that they downregulate the amount of inflammation in your body, which is an incredibly useful thing for sometimes life-threatening diseases are caused by inflammation. And the fifth factor, as if 4 were not enough, the fifth factor is that there's an enzyme called telomerase, which repairs and maintains the ends of the chromosomes. And Elizabeth Blackburn got the Nobel Prize for discovering this system. And she and her colleague, Alyssa Epel, have studied how 3-pillar practices optimize this enzyme. And as they say in this book I wrote called Aware, when they reviewed the manuscript, Alyssa Epel reviewed the manuscript, she said, oh, you have to put something else in the book. And I said, what else do you have to put in the book? These practices actually, she said, and she's the world's expert in this, slows the aging process. So I'm actually 150 years old. No, I'm not 150 years old, but you can show that people who do 3-pillar practice actually can repair and maintain the ends of their chromosomes. And that's one of the major signs of aging. And stress whittles down those ends of the chromosomes. So if I told you there was a vitamin that did those 5 things, that basically had no negative side effects, and in addition, it integrated your brain, which is the basis of having a resilient mind, how many of you would think about doing that? Now, we can say yes, yes in the chat, but I don't need to do that. You can imagine most people would say yes. So there is a practice that you can learn to do that actually has the 3 pillars in it. And these 3-pillar practices have been shown to give these 5 medical changes that improve health and this 1 brain change. So then you could say, what would motivate you to do it? Right. And Caroline Welch, who is our CEO at the Mindsight Institute, also the mother of my 2 children, our 2 children, and also my wife. Caroline wrote a book called The Gift of Presence, which talks to women. It's a mindfulness guide for women that offers you deep insights into how these practices have helped people and what are some of the roadblocks to actually starting a practice. And then she has practices in that book. And then, where we have the Wheel of Awareness. So there are things you can start doing. So if you feel that the pandemic has made you feel helpless, or you feel like your health is being compromised because you're not sleeping enough, sleep is incredibly important, you're not exercising enough, or you're not finding a way to attain this kind of sense of clarity, these 3-pillar practices can help you do just that. So what I'd like to conclude with before we open up for questions is that we are relational beings. And if we as parents or we as educators are getting burnt out, or we are continually feeling in a threat, no brain state, our children at home, our adolescents at home, and our students, they're going to pick that up from us. Even if we say, oh, here's the curriculum, or oh, here's dinner, if you're saying that from a no brain reactive state, and you're finding yourself exhausted and burnt out, please reach out for help, because there's help actually right around the corner for you. And this is something we all can do together. So this is not like a passive thing where you say, well, the pandemic is here and it's going to probably be here for a few more years, which is probably true. And I can't take it anymore, which you may be feeling, but you can develop the inner resources to actually face whatever challenge that we have in front of us. And this viral pandemic is only one of many pandemics that unfortunately are just going to be making life more challenging. This is not like the end of our troubles. People are realizing how interdependent the world really is. And in that interdependency, we realize things are out of our control. Well, they're not out of our personal control, because we can actually develop the inner strength to cultivate a way of actually being in this world, to give our kids who are in our classrooms, or our kids who are in our living rooms, the kind of strength that they're going to need as they assume responsibility as adults to take on these challenges, which, as you know, and I'm so sad to say this, is just going to get more intense. So we need the inner tools from the inside out. And what I'm trying to offer you here is like a view of how the child's brain develops, how the adolescent's brain develops. But now what I'm really talking about is your brain. That you are not passive. You don't have to just say, oh my God, but I'm an adult. My brain is done growing. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. We've have studies, we meaning we humans, have done studies where you can show, if you start doing 3-pillar practice, you can change your brain in a relatively short time. So you are not passive. And what I like to say is, where attention goes, neural firing flows and neural connection grows. So where attention goes is you have that empowerment to use your attention. Where attention goes, neural firing flows, to actually get different networks in your brain to get activated. And neural connection grows. That means the state that you create during a practice actually becomes a trait in your life. So the great news is, if you haven't heard about this stuff before, you now have like the cutting edge science view of what we all need to do collectively as a human family, for you as a community in the schools that you're involved with, for a community just of people who are just people on the planet. We now have a path forward. And, we can enlarge that and say, part of all the problems that we mentioned, the viral pandemic, the pandemic of social injustice, even the pandemic of how people they're having their attention grabbed by social media, the pandemic of all the polarization and misinformation, and the pandemic of environmental destruction. All those are related to something I haven't mentioned yet, but I'll just say it as we close this part of our time together. Modern culture has taken the word self, S-E-L-F, self, and made it so individualistic that people feel as if the self only exists inside of them. Now, in many religious communities, this isn't what's taught. But in the general secular world, this is how people are growing up, to think they're separate individuals that aren't really responsible for each other, and that what they're to do is try to accumulate as much material wealth as they can, and then just try to have a good time. And that leads to what's called the Hedonic Treadmill. And you can point to many of the origins of the problems we're having, is this massive disconnection people feel. So instead of just being a me, and in the United States, we have the most intense individualistic culture, we can realize that the we that is taught in so many spiritual and religious traditions is actually what the self also is. And what I like to say about an integrated self is that you have an interiority to your body. You should sleep your body well, exercise your body, feed your body well, treat your body well. Your body is something you get to keep for about 100 years, but you are much more than your body. In this present 100-year time, you are your relationships with people and your relationships with nature. And that, if we call that a we, you are both a me in the body and a we in your relationships. So if you integrate those two, you have me plus we is the funny word mui. And I'd like to know, in all the languages in the world, including Hebrew, if there's a way of saying that, if it isn't already existing, how you would make that up, me plus we, and hold on to the integrity of both and combine them, like me plus we is mui. So Mui thanks you for being here. I'm looking forward to our discussion, and thank you for being present this evening.
All right, Dr. Siegel, thank you so much for those insights. We'd like to open the floor to questions. Does anyone want to ask a question of our speaker?
I don't mind starting. Dr. Siegel, we have a number of teachers that are on the call tonight listening to you speak. And when you are talking about co-regulation, and when you are talking about social referencing, are there certain strategies that you could recommend to teachers, sort of on the spot self-care strategies, if they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have a whole program out of the Garrison Institute that we've researched and has been shown to actually help, that teaches self-care strategies for teachers. It's called the CARE program. So if you, I'm on the board of the Garrison Institute, and if you go to garrisoninstitute.org and just, type in CARE, the CARE program, you will find research established ways to help teachers take care of themselves and significantly not only decrease burnout, but when you study the impact on the children who aren't being taught anything directly, because the teachers just taught self-care, the children do much, much better when their teacher is taking the CARE program versus the control groups. So that's a whole, it's like a 2-day, intensive that you can do. Mark Greenberg, who's a wonderful colleague who helps mediate that, and Tish Jennings is the one who created it. Tish also has she has 2 books out, and I want to get their names right, but if just looks up Patricia Jennings, Jennings, she's the one who was spearheading our project at Garrison, and she wrote a book called Trauma Informed Classroom, and then I can't remember the name of the other ones, but those would be really good resources. In a nutshell, they teach the wheel of awareness that I mentioned earlier, and you're learning, these techniques of, mindfulness basically means I've learned to focus attention on what's going on. I've learned to open my awareness. It's all these 3 pillars I was talking about. And then I learned to be kind internally and develop a state of gratitude for life, essentially. So those are teachable skills there, and that's what we do in the CARE program. So you'll see that. Yeah. And someone wrote, I don't know how you would say this, aniachnu for me, we in Hebrew. Is that a word you just made up, or is that a word that actually, this is for Andrea, or is that a word that actually already exists, which I think would be awesome? Or did you just make that up?
I made it up.
You made it up. Okay,
I
cool.
combined 2 words, I and we.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Great. And, we're collecting this in all the languages in the world. I'm going to try to, I can't see how to save the chat here, but I'm going to try to grab that somehow. Maybe I can I don't know if this thing will work. Edit. Yeah, I think I can copy. No, it won't let me copy it. All right, I'm gonna have to memorize that in my head, or I'll take a picture with my phone, because we're trying to make a list literally of all the different, where did it go? All the
It's not
different.
exactly accurate. It's just sort of combined in a bizarre way that may
Okay, well,
work.
that's good. That's fine. I love
Okay.
that. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, Dr. Siegel, someone asked if you could repeat the 4 S's.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the first one is safe. Attachment is all about safety. And these, these are reviewed in great detail in a book called The Power of Showing Up that Tina Payne Bryson and I wrote. So you'll see these kind of spelled out and how to actually make them happen in a classroom or in a home. So it's safety is number 1. And that means not just keeping a child safe, but making sure that if we do something that terrifies them, that we make a repair to that. And that can be anything from we're just really distressed and we look really, really out of it, or we're getting drunk, or we're screaming at the top of our lungs at some political figure or whatever, something that is from an attachment figure that makes a child feel terrified of that attachment figure leads to what's called disorganized response in the child. And so this is an aspect of safety that really needs to be taken care of. So that's the first S. The second S is seen. And this is where you use your mind sight ability, that is to see the feelings and thoughts and meaning beneath the behavior that you're seeing with your eyesight. Now we're talking about mind sight. And that's what being seen is. Soothed means your child is, that's the third S, distressed, and you're helping them reach a state of calmness in the face of that distress. And then when you have these and they aren't, when there are ruptures to them, you make a repair, then you develop the fourth S, which is secure. And security doesn't mean like you're immune to any problem that happens. It just means you develop basically an internal compass that helps guide you through life in a positive way.
Thank you. If someone's interested in digging into the 3 pillars, which of your books do you suggest they recommend, or do you suggest they start with?
You know, the book that just came out last week is called Becoming Aware, and it teaches you how to do the Wheel of Awareness practice. And that can be plenty, and you can do it also from the website with the book. It's like a little manual. It's the manual for a larger book, which you don't have to read, but that's called Aware, which has examples of people using the wheel. And it also has a very deep dive into, more of the science of consciousness and what the hub of that wheel is really all about. And so for people who like that kind of stuff, it's kind of a mind-blowing moment to actually do a practice like the wheel, see this deep dive into basically the physics of consciousness. And for many people, it's been just transformative, that book. But some people don't like science or don't want to know that stuff. So then just the Becoming Aware book would be plenty.
And is this something that we can teach explicitly to kids?
Yeah, we have teachers teaching this in kindergarten as a drawing. So for example, one teacher who used it, had a child who he was kicked out of one school and was sent to her kindergarten in a new school. And let's just call him Billy. So she wrote me an email saying, all the kids in the classroom were learning the Wheel of Awareness as a drawing, not as a meditation or anything. And on the second day, after they had learned that, Billy came in during recess and said, Miss Smith, you've got to, let me come inside during recess. She goes, what's going on? She goes, well, Joey, he took my block and I'm about to punch him in the face, which is why he got kicked out of the other school. And he goes, I'm lost on my rim, which is the part where you're aware of things, the things you're aware of. I need to get back to my hub, he says, which is where you have this spacious awareness. So the thing you're aware of is on the rim. What you're aware of is in the hub. And we've heard many, many examples like that where kids as young as 5 can see this visualization of their mind, and they use just the visual drawing, to explore what their experience is like, and to create, as Viktor Frankl is said to have said, but he never said it, there's a pause between impulse and action. And that's, what you can, that's where choice is. And I say that very advisedly because Alex Vesely is Viktor Frankl's grandson. And I called Alex up because I wanted to quote Viktor Frankl, I love dearly. And everyone quotes him, but no one could find out where he wrote it because he never said it.
Right.
So everyone attributes him, which is great. But as Alex says, he never said it. So we can attribute it to him, but he never said it. But that's the idea, that there's a space between impulse and action, and in that space is the place of choice, and that's what the hub is. And yeah. So that's probably the best way to learn that. And we have a course that's actually happening right now that you can take, but you can also do it on your own time asynchronously, where there was a retreat where actually Alex Vesely was the cinematographer, which is actually when I asked him this question, because I wanted to quote his grandpa, and there he was, my filmmaker. So he said, no, he didn't say it. And so you can watch the film that Alex made of this retreat in the Redwoods, and you can then learn the Wheel of Awareness practice just by watching it's about a 10-hour retreat we had. Yeah. Now I see there's some questions. I don't know if you want to read them from the.
Yep.
Do you want me to read them, or you want to go ahead and read them?
I'll read them to you.
Great.
For some of us, the world did not stop. It actually became more stressful and intense. I feel that my kids feel my anxiety and stress at times because the usual avenues to release and relax have been taken away. How do you just shelter our kids from the situation?
Well, yeah, this is exactly the question. So when you say, for many of us, it became more stressful and intense. So when I say the world stopped, I don't mean, we all became peaceful, Buddhas. No, it's more stressful and intense. So what I would do, if you can find a way to work this out, is I would literally learn the Wheel of Awareness practice. And I'm only saying it because I'm very familiar with it, and it has all three pillars in it. And you will find, as you say there, how do I work with, from the situation of my own stress and anxiety? It needs to begin with us. That if we don't come with this yes brain state, that no brain, fight, flight, freeze, faint that we feel that's our stress, our kids are going to pick it up. So there's no parenting strategies or teaching strategies I can give you if you are in that reactive state. So the good news is we have research-based practices that you can do if you choose to. No one can make you do it. Where attention goes is completely up to you. Then once you decide, I'm going to put my attention to this practice, you really, in the end, only need about 12 minutes a day. So if you say, I don't have 12 minutes a day, well, then you should do 24 minutes a day, so that you really give yourself that gift, and so, there's a book called Peak Mind that just came out. The author is a friend of mine, Amishi Jha. And, she was able to show that even people who are in the military, or people who are like, firefighters, fire jumpers, high intensity thing, they can use these 3-pillar practices and cultivate this clarity. And the research shows they actually do, and they can keep it going, in the middle of war zones. So, I think we can do that too. During a pandemic where things are really stressful, not the way we want them to be, you can build on the research findings and give yourself that gift. Now, a lot of people feel, oh, I don't deserve to give myself the time. I got to be always taking care of my kids, Well, the best way to take care of your kids is to take care of yourself first.
You talked a lot about adults and reactivity. Can you offer us some perspective on reactivity in kids and how best to engage with it?
Yeah, I was watching the kids' faces as we were doing the exercise, and at least 2 of them were having big responses. Kids, have the exact same kind of experience you did tonight. and naming it can frame it, So I would name these two states. Reactive is the no brain state, receptive is the, open state. I would do the practice with my kids and say, let's see if you can tell in your body when you're feeling that reactive feeling of the no brain. Remember we did no, yeah. Okay, now let's learn some techniques. Let's sense your breathing, put a hand on your chest, a hand on your belly. Let's move around. What you're doing, basically, the mind, we're not even talking about the intellectual side of this, but the mind is a regulatory process. So like whenever you regulate like a bicycle, you got to monitor what's happening with the thing you're regulating and modify it, right? So the monitoring in a bike, what do? You look with your eyes, you listen to what's going on, you feel the balance, that's how you monitor it. But then you modify it by, pedaling the pedals, leaning this way or that way, pressing on the brakes, So that's what regulation means, is monitoring and modifying. You as a teacher or you as a parent have the opportunity. It's rarely done, but you have the opportunity to teach your child to monitor what? Energy and information flow, where inside the body and between the body and the world around you or them, So this isn't just like a joke. I mean, when I say the 3-pillar practice, it changes people's lives, it's because you're changing their mind. You are allowing them to monitor with more stability so that they see with more clarity, depth, and detail. Then once they're seeing stuff like that, it's seeing with that kind of detail, then they can modify how we call it towards integration. And when you move from a non-integrated reactive state to an integrated state of receptivity, there are specific ways you do that. And I wrote a book called Mindsight, which would be another resource you could have that teaches you, okay, what exactly is not being differentiated and linked? Why am I in such chaos, or why am I in such rigidity? And then you literally learn how to strengthen your mind, because number one, you're learning to monitor with more stability, so you see more. Number two, you're learning to modify toward what's called integration. So a lot of things that happen in life lead to chaos or rigidity when they don't go well. Chaos or rigidity is an outcome of impaired integration. And what this practice does, and you can read about it in Mindsight, but every book I wrote with Tina Payne Bryson, the book I wrote with Mary Hartzell, the parenting book, Brainstorm, all those books, they're all about one thing. They're all about integration. How you use Mindsight to clarify what you see and transform what you see in a more integrated way. Every book is that way. My kids who are now adults, they say, how can you write all those books? I say, because I'm just basically saying the same thing over and over again, either showing the science of it or applying it here, applying it there. The wheel of awareness is just about integrating consciousness. I mean, I say just, it's a big deal, but it's the same topic. So in terms of this question you're having, yeah, give yourself the gift of being able to integrate your life.
Thank you. Another person asked for suggestions to help repair the relationship with their son that have emerged over the past 2 years.
Yeah, well, there's a great book by Ed Tronick, Tronick, that he wrote with a pediatrician colleague of his. I think it's called The Power of Discord or something like that. And what Ed, has written extensively about, and everyone has, not everyone, but a lot of people have watched this thing called the still face experiment. It's basically what Ed's message is that there are always ruptures in life. There's always non-attunements in life. The key thing is making a repair of the discord. And so, there are all sorts of things that can happen in parenting from the inside out. There's an entire chapter on making a repair that would be good to read. In Brainstorm, there are things on repair. Depending on how old the child you're referring to is. And Tina Payne Bryson and I, we talk about repair all the time, and we give examples of how we messed up and the repair we've tried to make, because it is all about repair. So depending on the age of your kid and what the issue is that needs repair, you can, I think those resources would really guide you. There's lots of examples.
Do you have a favorite mindfulness exercise for preschool age kids?
When we did a research study through our center in preschool age kids, and a lot of the exercises we used are by Susan Kaiser Greenland, and she has two, well, maybe it's one book and one exercise thing. So just look up Susan Kaiser, Kaiser, and then Greenland. Susan, she's just written these fantastic exercises, and that's what we used in the preschool study, and we got great responses. The other thing you might look at, I think we went down that low. Yeah, if you look at Goldie Hawn's Mind Up program that was published by Scholastic, I think I was an advisor to that program, but I'm trying to remember because I'm probably mixing it up with Susan's stuff. I think we went down to preschool age, but that might be wrong. It might start in kindergarten. But in any event, you can look at the Goldie Hawn Foundation's Mind Up program.